Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. If we have not met, if you're visiting Lewisville, my name is Matt. Welcome here. It's good to have you. I know that as summer gets closer and closer, the exodus and the pull to other places gets stronger and stronger. So welcome, faithful lovers of Jesus. Crowns in heaven, my friends. So here's one of the things I've really loved about as our kids have gotten older, is that we can make that transition from kids' Disney movies to what I would say is like more real movies, real people movies. Now, I know some parents love the kids stage where you're watching Disney and Pixar and all those, and it's fine. I have sat through those in my time, but I've really loved, as the kids get older, that we get to watch different kinds of movies together and experience things. So, for instance, I'm not a huge sci-fi fan, but when Dune Part 2 came out, Tabea and Hadley and I all went to the theater and we watched that, and I thought it was awesome. It was so fun. Just to be able to go through movies and experiences like that together was great. It's also really fun to get to introduce them to movies that maybe they have never watched before that were some of my favorite movies. So I'm just going to put a disclaimer on that. I know different people kind of have different opinions about movies and what movies you should watch, especially in kind of the variety of circles we have here at Lewisville. So the movie I'm about to tell you about, if you have an issue with it, let's talk about it afterwards. Don't leave, but we'll have conversation about that another time. So the movie I was really excited to introduce the family to was Shawshank Redemption. Judging by the claps, we're all sinners, so it's great. So, Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorite movies. And if you don't know, here's the premise of the movie. It's a Stephen King novel, based on a Stephen King novel. And the guy on the left, Tim Robbins' character, he plays a guy named Andy Dufresne, who's a banker who's charged with a double murder, and he's sent to jail. And he always, through the whole movie, remains that he's innocent, and he never did the crime, but he's put away to Shawshank Penitentiary. And he meets Morgan Freeman's character, nicknamed Red, and they strike up this friendship. And the movie spans a number of years, 19 years in total, I think it is. And it tells this whole story of how Andy ends up in prison and the friendships. And it is pretty gritty, I admit that. And there's some difficult things to watch as they're trying to portray what life in this penitentiary would look like. But there's also this beauty and redemption that comes through it in this relationship and everything that happens. Now, Andy being a banker, one of the cool things is that people start over time asking his advice on financial matters. He starts doing people's tax returns and begins keeping the books for the warden of the penitentiary, who's like a really crooked person. And so what you learn as the movie goes on, especially at the end, is that Andy breaks out 19 years later and he escapes. And you get to learn about all the things he was doing before that allowed this escape to be possible, to break out of his cell and to get out, and the ways that he also exposed kind of the evils of the prison warden, and it all kind of ties together. And it's just this wonderful movie, again, depending on your opinion, but Dennis clapped, so I'm going to hold. If it's good enough for Dennis, it's good enough for me. So this morning, as we're continuing to work through the book of Acts, looking at the rise and the birth and the growth of the early church, we're looking at a prison break story of sorts. Although this one is not 19 years in the making, it happens really, really quickly with supernatural intervention. So grab your Bibles, Acts chapter 12. If you have your Bibles with you, or flip open your app, if you scan this QR code that's going to be on the screen here in a second, you'll be able to just jump right away to the text. So just take a picture of that QR code. And I encourage you just to follow along. We're going to spend some time reading it through together. And then, as is our normal practice, we will specifically talk about what are the things about this text that we need to think about, and what are the key ideas we want to learn and engage with. We're also going to give some time to wonder, to engage biblical imagination. What do we wish we had a bit more information about? How's this all work? And be ready, we're going to have times, as long as I manage my time well, we're going to have a few moments for you to talk a little bit and to pass some mics around and turn it a little bit into, as much as we can, into a conversation. You can ask a question, but really what I'm trying to say and get a sense on what are the things and the themes that are emerging in our community as we read the text together and what God might be saying to us together. So excited for this. I also just want to say that my father and my younger brother Mark are here with us. They flew in on Friday, and so here's what I will just say. If they tell you stories about me, you can ignore most of them if they're bad. And please make up some good things about me for them afterwards, so that it all balances out, okay? Let's read together Acts chapter 12. Excited for this. Let's just jump in. Beginning at verse 1, it says, it was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handed him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for a public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. That night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals," and Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to an iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen." When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter is at the door." "You're out of your mind," they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. "Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this," he said, and then he left for another place. In the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. After Herod had had a thorough search made for him, they did not find him. He cross-examined the guards and ordered that they be executed. And then we have a little bit of this extra tag that Luke writes for us. It says, then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. He had been quarreling with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and now they joined together and sought an audience with him. After securing the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace, because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, "This is the voice of a God, not of a man." Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of God continued to spread and flourish. Okay, let's get in on this. Let's think our way through this. Let's talk about some things. First off, let's talk about the continuation of persecution. So we've been moving along week in, week out, and Luke, in his recording of the facts, has not really talked about persecution for a little while. So not since we read in chapter 7 about the stoning of Stephen, which Saul looked on with approval of, and then he launches into this great persecution of the church, and then in chapter 9 when Saul converts and has this encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, that idea of persecution has kind of been in the background a little bit for us, because we've been talking about the rise, the expansion, the growth, Gentiles coming to faith, new people finding Jesus, the word of and the message, the gospel, good news of Jesus spreading further and further out from the center of Jerusalem. And so it feels like, it can feel like, that everything was on the up and up and there was no trouble going on at all. But this is not the case. Always behind the scenes, kind of bubbling behind, even though Luke's not specifically bringing our attention to it, has been this growing resentment and persecution against the church. You can imagine. So just think about it this way. You can imagine that for thousands of years, you've had one idea of what it meant to be in relationship with God. So the Jewish people, all the way back to the covenant with Abraham, had this idea of what God was doing as he formed covenant with them and established relationship with them. The sacrificial system, what it meant to relate to God, how to relate to each other, all the laws that are found in the Old Testament Levitical law. All these things ordered and shaped their understanding of not only national identity, but also connection with God. And so if you do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah that he says he is, then you're going to do everything you can to stop these misfits from spreading this message of Jesus as if he was the Messiah. Right? So you have this emergence of two different spheres. You have those who are saying, Jesus is the one we have been waiting for, and doing everything they can to tell more people about it. And then you have the establishment who do not believe that, doing everything they can to stop the spread of this message. Inherent in all of this, too, is this struggle for power. So in any human enterprise or endeavor, whenever there's a sense of leadership, there's always a temptation, potential for power and control. And what has emerged over the centuries is that the Jewish leadership has this strong sense of power and control. And so to recognize Jesus as Messiah is to upset their leadership and their place in society, in the culture. Not to mention that these followers of Jesus, these Jewish people now are spreading this message to anyone who wants to hear, even non-Jews, the Gentiles, which is even more disrespectful to them. Now anyone can be a part of this. Instead of just this being our national identity, now this can be for anyone, even those people. Right? So it's stirring up all these things. So over and over, it could feel like, well, we haven't talked about persecution, but I just want to, this is a good time for us to pause and say it's always still happening behind the scenes. Even if Luke in his writing has not been specifically telling us stories about it, it's always happening behind the scenes. So then we're introduced to this character, Herod. Let me tell you a little bit about what we know historically about Herod, just for context. So Herod, his full name, Herod Agrippa I, the grandson of Herod the Great. So if King Herod or Herod the Great kind of rings a bell for you, this was the guy who, when Jesus was first born, ordered the execution, the death of any male baby 2 and under, because he had heard that Jesus was coming, and he was threatened about what it might mean to his sense of power and control, and he has this terrible, terrible edict that goes out for murder. So that is his grandfather. That's the family line, the lineage of what's happening here. So Herod, that what we do know is he was raised in Rome and he spent time among the elite. He became friends with those who would eventually become emperors of Rome, namely Claudius and Gaius. So he was like a really connected person. And now he comes back and he has rule and reign over the whole Judean region. So he is a person of power. He also has a pretty good relationship, what we know historically, with the Jewish people. He's not really looking to do a whole lot against them, except he has this kind of burn his saddle against these followers of Jesus, these early Christians. So that's what we know about him. And if you notice in verse 1, about the time King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. That was his intent. And he scoops up James, a brother of John, as part of them. If you don't know who James is, let me give you a little recap. So James and his brother John were fishermen. They're working with their father Zebedee, and this guy named Jesus starts coming along the Sea of Galilee, and he says, "Come and follow me." And if you read in the Gospels, immediately these two brothers leave their father's fishing business and follow Jesus. And that's the moment their life completely changes. Then they move from fishermen to these disciples of Jesus, these apprentices of Jesus, learning Jesus' way and teaching and absorbing it and being transformed by it. And then with Jesus' death and resurrection, they become now leaders in the church. And James himself is a leader in the early church, considered an apostle. And so he is a central figure, and it would appear that Herod is putting his attention and focus on the leadership and those who would call themselves Christians, trying to disrupt what's going on. And notice what it says. When he kills him, when he says he put, end of verse 2, put to death with the sword, that means most scholars would say they cut off his head. That was his execution. So he kills it. Notice what it says then in verse 3. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. So he's encouraged and emboldened and empowered by the response he gets by persecuting and killing this key leader in the early church movement in the city of Jerusalem. He kills him, gets some good positive reinforcing feedback, and it kind of emboldens him to do some more. So he grabs Peter, the key leader here. So that's what's going on here. Those are the figures, the characters, how it's all shaping up. It all happens here in this festival of unleavened bread. So this is right around the Passover time. So Passover was one evening where they marked their exodus out, as a nation, exodus out of slavery in Egypt. This was an annual tradition and festival for them. And then the festival of unleavened bread was the next 7 days after that. So it's this whole festival time. This is the same time period, if you remember, where Jesus was arrested and crucified. It was around the same time, just a few short years earlier. So he grabs Peter, but instead of dealing with him right away, he puts him in prison and leaves him there, waiting for the festival to end, and then he's going to put him in a kind of a public, you can imagine where this is going, a public mock trial, get some more people riled up, get attention back on himself. And ultimately, his plan is to kill Peter. So that's the setting of what's going on as Peter now finds himself in jail as a leader in the church. Remember, we've talked in weeks past that Peter has been out and about exploring what's going on and what God's doing in the Gentile mission. Right? We know he has spent time. He's been with Simon the tanner in Joppa. He's explored different things. Remember, Cornelius sent for him, and he goes up to Antioch, and that's the main hub city of the Roman Empire for shipping and transport and administration, and that's where followers of Jesus are first called Christians. And now Peter is back in Jerusalem, and now he finds himself in jail. Okay, let's talk about now, number 2. Let's think about this miraculous escape. So imagine we read it through and it'd be like, oh yeah, an angel showed up. But just stop for a second. Imagine you're in jail, you're chained up between the guards, and an angel shows up to rescue you. That seems just crazy, right? To our modern Western minds, it just seems so foreign to our understanding and experience. It can feel like, wait, what? Now imagine that happens twice to you. So, if you remember, if you've been tracking, back in Acts chapter 5, the religious leaders round up a whole bunch of leaders in the church and throw them in jail. And Peter is among them. Let me just read this account from Acts 5, which we covered. It was probably back in the fall we were in this section. It said, but during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the doors of the jail and brought them out. Go stand in the temple courts, he said, and tell the people all about this new life. That was in the very beginning, as this message of Jesus is being owned and stewarded by the early church, by the early Christians. They were already in jail, and it had happened once before. Now it's happening all over again. So now just expand your sense of awe and amazement to an angel showing up again. Can you imagine what's going on? So here's the thing about that Acts chapter 5, the earlier account. We don't have any of the details of what really it looked like. Just that verse I just read for you. We don't know a whole lot about it. But for whatever reason, in this account, Luke decides he's going to give us a lot more information, which I love. I want to know, how did you get out? How did that work? What was going on? What was being said? And so that's what I love about Acts chapter 12 is we get more of the details. It's like back to Shawshank Redemption. If you just got out and disappeared and Andy's on the run and then you never learn anymore, it could feel like, well, on one level, this is amazing. He found his way out of there. He picked his way out. He covered it with a poster. If you haven't watched the movie, you've had a lot of time. Spoiler alerts are gone. So anyways, he uses this little rock axe. He gets out. He has this whole thing. But at the end of the movie, when it shows you and it looks back, all the different things that are happening in order for that escape to happen, it's so awesome. Because now you get like a look back and like, oh, that's what was going on. Those were the details. That's why he did that. Or here's how that worked. So I feel like in Acts chapter 12 here, we get a little bit of that from Luke as he's writing this for us. We get to know some of the context and the ideas. And the very first thing, so what I want to do, here's what we're going to do. I want to read it again for you. And the first time we just kind of pass through. I want to read it again for you, and I would love for you just to stop and pay attention to maybe one or two, maybe three specific things that jump out for you that catch your attention because they're just so incredible. Like, let's just put ourselves in the idea, the context, the moment. Let's just think about this. So I want to read it. If you have a Bible, you might want to underline it or circle something, or if you're on your phone or iPad or whatever, just take a note. Maybe you can have a conversation about this in a moment. But let me read through this again about how miraculous this is and all the details that Luke gives us. So beginning in verse 5, so Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. I just want to pause right there. The interesting thing, as we're about to read this account, is that as he's in prison, the other followers of Jesus are praying earnestly for their friend Peter, asking God to intervene on some level. There's almost like this partnership of everything we can do as human beings. We're going to offer everything we can do to the problem of what's going on, and we're asking for divine intervention to partner with us in this problem. We're offering what we have, and we're asking God to meet us where we're at. This kind of power of partnership we see on display. Okay, here we go. Verse 6. Note these things. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in his cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals." And Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of prison, but had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. So I don't know what's grabbing your attention there, but can we just, again, spend some moments talking about this miraculous escape? So it's down to the wire. It's the night before his trial. The next day, there's going to be a mock trial, and he's going to be killed. Everything is pointing that way. There's guards all over the place. The indication in verse 4 about how many guards there are, it's like Luke's way of saying, there are so many guards, escape is not possible. He's trying to talk about, there's just so many here, so many things going on, there's no way escape is possible. That's his way of building this tension of like, without God, this is never going to happen. Guards at the entrance, guards sleeping beside him, chained up. Angel appears out of nowhere, physically just appears, and there's a light in the dark cell. I love that the angel gives Peter like a shove or a kick or a poke in the stomach or whatever. Like, you know, I feel like there's a little humor in that too. This angelic beating is like, come on, get up. Like, just a little frustrated, like, wake up. Like, also, how is Peter sleeping? Like, how do you just go to sleep between two guards all chained up? What's going on there? They walk past multiple guards. This iron gate leading to the city just opens before them. Peter doesn't really realize any of this is happening. He thinks it's a vision. Until they walk down the street and the angel disappears. Now, to be fair to Peter, he's had a vision like some kind of visit from angels before, right? Just a couple weeks ago, we looked at this vision he had as he's spending time with Simon the tanner in the city of Joppa. And in that vision, just to quickly make sure we're all up to speed, in that vision, he sees this like a sheet like a sheet coming down from heaven. And in the sheet are all kinds of different animals. And the voice from heaven in this vision says, you know, don't call anything unclean that God himself has made clean. And it's this turning point in Peter's understanding of what was in and out between Jew and Gentile, those who were in, those who were out, what was possible, challenging all kinds of like old Mosaic law. Anyways, that was setting the stage for what was to come next. So he's had a vision where that sheet was literally not coming down over Simon the tanner's house in Joppa. Like the animals weren't right there. It was a vision. So I think to be fair to Peter, it's okay to assume that he's having this moment and he's like, oh, here's another one of those wacky dreams. Like, who knows, right? And it's not until he's fully outside, down the street, in relative safety, the angel leaves, and he realizes, oh, like, that really happened. I'm on the outside. And then he's on his way. I just love that that's what's going on here. N.T. Wright, in his commentary on the book of Acts, says, the story of Peter's imprisonment and the miraculous release is designed to remind us that the gospel's advance will encounter opposition, but that God is more than capable of overcoming it. So in Luke's giving us all these details, he's trying to pack in this idea of without God, this kind of escape just would never have happened. But notice when God gets involved and intervenes, how easily everything happens. The chains fall off, the iron gate opens, they just walk on through it, and it's as if Peter doesn't even realize what's going on, and he's on the outside. We can maybe come back to that in our conversation. Okay, let's think about another section here. We have this from verse 12 to verse 16, this idea of Peter being on the move and a hint at a transition of leadership that's not overtly spelled out, but I think is good for us to note here. So first we have this somewhat, in my mind, humorous account of Peter going to Mary's house. You can imagine he's knocking at the door. It feels like a little bit like a Monty Python skit. He's knocking at the door. The person comes, recognizes his voice, leaves him out there on the street, goes back. They think she's crazy. And then they respond, oh, maybe it's just his angel, which is also a pretty interesting statement. Oh, maybe it's just his angel with him. And finally he gets in and he tells them to be quiet and he recounts the whole story. He tells them everything that's going on. And then he says, end of verse 17, it says, tell James and the brothers about this, he said, and then he left for another place. So what isn't maybe obvious for us all these years later is up until this point, Peter has been the leader of the church in Jerusalem. He's been like the key leader of the Jesus followers all around the city of Jerusalem where this all got started. And this is a moment that marks a transition of leadership. Peter now says he goes to another place. We're not exactly sure where he immediately went to, but he's gone, he's taken off, And James now receives this mantle of leadership and becomes the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And we know that historically he now continues to play that role. So there's this transition that takes place because of this imprisonment, because of this rescue. Peter is now off, and another person steps in to lead. There's also a really interesting section here that I'd just love to spend a moment on as we're thinking our way through the text here. This information about Herod. Let's look at that for a second. So obviously, beginning in verse 18, for a couple verses, it recounts, like think of any jailbreak, like all those normal things are going to happen. You're going to search the prison, you're going to find out, you're going to interrogate all those who were involved. Greco-Roman law in those days that if you were responsible to oversee the imprisonment of someone like this, that if they get away, that you pay with it. You pay for it by your life. It's just the way the law developed in the coming few centuries after this is that whatever the crime was that you were guarding the person for becomes now your punishment. This is how it develops in the next couple centuries. So if I was in charge of guarding someone because they were a thief and they got away, whatever the punishment for that thief would be would now become my punishment. But in this moment, with what was happening to Peter, his significance and where this was all headed, just after an execution a couple days earlier with another leader in the church, all these guards, all these people who are supposed to make sure he doesn't escape, they all pay with their lives. So they're all wiped out. And then we have this note where Herod transitions from Jerusalem to Caesarea, which is kind of his capital on the coast. So he heads that way, and it notes. It's kind of interesting that Luke includes this stuff, whether it strikes you as interesting or not. I find it fascinating because it notes now some more historic details that you're kind of wondering, why did Luke put this in here? Like, we could have just ended that Peter hands off leadership of the church and he's on the go, and we could have ended there. But he circles back to Herod. Circles back, and I think he's trying to teach us something important here. So here we see this account where he goes back to Caesarea. He stays there, and it notes that there's been some kind of a disagreement, a quarrel going on with the people of Tyre and Sidon. And so they seek an audience. And I love this guy named Blastus, who all of a sudden shows up, some kind of a trusted personal support. This audience is arranged. They resolve their differences. They know they need Herod and his food supply so that they can survive. It's kind of giving us a picture of the political situation and the economic situation around food supply. And then we have, beginning in verse 21, this really interesting point where it says that Herod comes out and there's this grand ceremony. He's going to give this big speech. And as he gives this speech, everyone calls out the way he does it, calls out that he's not a man, he's a God. Remember, the temptation of those in power and leadership could be to take the accolades and to take on roles that they do not deserve. And here he's taking on this sense of divinity. And people are calling out, you're not a man, you're a God. And he's eating it all up. He's loving it. So here's some more details I grabbed that I love. So Josephus is a first century historian and scholar priest. And so he, in his Antiquities, writes about this moment because as a king, everyone would know what happens to him. It's not just like a Christian or a Jewish thing. Like the whole region would be aware if he kind of drops down and dies, right? So this Jewish historian also writes about this account. Now, he goes on and on pretty long about it. And I'm not saying this is scripture. I'm adding some color to the story, okay? But here's how Josephus talks about it in his writings, Antiquities 19, 344 to 347. He describes the garment he puts on when he comes out for this speech. He says, he put on a garment made wholly of silver and came into the theater early in the morning, at which time the silver of his garment being illuminated by the fresh reflection of the sun's rays upon it shone out after a surprising manner. So he comes in and he's kind of glowing, is how Josephus talks about this moment in history. And then it says, presently his flatterers cry out from one place to another, not for his own good, that he was a god. Upon this, the king did neither rebuke them nor reject their impious flattery, he says. He soaks it all up. And then he goes on to talk about the manner by which he passes. He says, a severe pain also arose in his belly, and he began to be ill in a most violent manner. He therefore looked upon his friends and says, I, whom you call a god, am commanded presently to depart this life. I, who was called by you immortal, am immediately being hurried away by death. Anyways, Josephus gives us a little bit more. It's not, Luke doesn't record this in the Gospels, but it's interesting that two different sources are talking about the same moment in time in history where this king who is persecuting and after the early Christians, the church, takes on this praise, these accolades from the gathered people, and then God strikes him down. Craig Keener in his commentary says, Herod Agrippa's death, recorded with vivid detail, serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the inevitability of divine judgment. And then the whole thing ends, as does much of the story through the book of Acts, with this transitionary statement that allows us to cap off one story and move to another. It says this at the very end, verse 24, but the word of God continued to increase and to spread. It's like no matter what's going on, there's still this sense of momentum and energy and something going on about this message, the way of Jesus, being shared with more and more and more people further and further and further away from its central beginnings in Jerusalem. Okay, I'm going to pause my part right there. So I don't know what questions you have, what imagination looks like for you. One thing I wonder about, if I'm just, it's not recorded here initially, but like where did Peter go? What's that look like? Is he on the run? Like I know they searched the prison and they interrogated the guards and the guards are executed, but you imagine if you played out that they're probably now searching for where Peter is. So you can imagine now he's almost like a fugitive on the run. I wonder what that was like for Peter. My imagination wants to think about that a little bit. How did Herod and the Jewish leaders resolve this issue? So obviously he's escaped, but do they in their minds resolve it by thinking, well, somehow like the guards were either in cahoots and helped him, or someone broke in and got him out, or like I'm sure they're trying to wonder how on earth was this possible when they had all these guards and chains and iron gates. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I wonder how they resolved it internally. And it makes me then take a next step. Did some of them maybe perhaps consider, I wonder if God was involved in this? Because this is the second time this guy's gotten away from us. Like, does that cause them to pause and wonder, is there something more happening here? Could there be something that what these people that we consider kind of freaks talking about Jesus as the way, is there something maybe with what they're saying? Because this guy has gotten away from us again. Thought we were going to end him and his leadership in the church. Lots of things I wonder about as we get going. Anyways, what I'd love to do is give you a second, give you a couple minutes. Give you a couple minutes just to chat about this. So you can talk with your neighbor, talk with someone around you, introduce yourself. We always say there's no pressure to do this. If you don't want to, you can grab another coffee. You can just get out your phone, and if you see someone on their phone, give them space, ignore them, they don't want to talk with you. So just take a few minutes, talk about these things, and then we're going to pass a few mics around. I'd love to have a little bit of a conversation, what we're learning, what's standing out for us together, and then we'll wrap some things up. So I'll watch the time. I'll call you back together. All right, go for it. All right, going to call you back together here. So let's have a little chat, a little conversation. We have a couple mic runners. Luke's got a mic. Farron's got a mic. All right, so just throw up your hand if there's something you were chatting about or something that came to mind that you would love to just mention to the group, and let's see what's kind of stirring. Don't be shy. Yes, Katie over here. Caitlin, is this your first time ever doing this? Oh, I was going to say you should get a prize for getting us started.
Prize?
All right.
Okay. I actually was really curious about what Peter's state of mind would have been, because he really would have thought he was going to die, right? He escaped once. The possibility of escape again is probably really low. So where was his head at? He escapes, and then he's like, okay, I've got to go do it again. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know if it's because he actually got to witness everything that Jesus did, so his passion was so deep. But if you're in a near-death situation, the obvious answer is not for you to just go do it again, right? For all of us, you have to wonder, how strong mentally he would have had to been to, go on and continue on and not, hesitate, it seems, to just jump in and do it all over again.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for mentioning that. That's great. Yeah, had he like you said, had he resigned himself that, I guess it is what it is tomorrow, and that's how he falls asleep, because it is what it is. Or maybe he was perhaps, is he so confident? Like, it's happened before. I might as well sleep. If God's going to do something, he's going to, yeah, who knows? It's really interesting. But like you said, he gets right back engaged again. Yeah. Someone's waving? Is this on? Oh, yeah, Alex. Hey, good morning.
Right in the back corner here.
There you are. I can barely see you.
I'm just wondering, as much as it's a different time and a different place, that actually much of that is the same that we face today. Peter, in that message, was contained and constrained by the world around him, by King Herod and all those obstacles, what maybe we would think of as life inhibitors for Peter at that time. And I'm just kind of wondering how that is the same for me. In my life, there are so many things around me that is distracting me, that is holding me back. And then an angel comes to Peter, not on his own strength, but an angel from God comes to Peter, wakes him up. And really what Peter does is just follow. And I think sometimes maybe I make it a little too complicated, then I have to see something maybe miraculous or something not in times of silence and solitude when perhaps the Lord will speak and is most clear. But I have to kind of invent something for whatever reason, but to move forward. But I'm just wondering from then till today, with all the distractions and all the things that we have to keep us kind of imprisoned, I guess, how that is impacting the way that we live our lives, or me.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Alex. It's great. Great thoughts. Oh, the back corner is strong this morning. Hello.
Yeah, it's kind of picking up something on what Alex was saying too. God acts in the situation regardless of the people involved. Like the prayer group that's praying for Peter, they had enough faith to gather together to pray, but they didn't quite have enough faith to believe that he would actually get released. But God still acts anyway.
Yeah.
You know, like regardless of who's involved, God is faithful, and he does what he wants to do and surprises them. And I think that's important for us to remember.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Vern. Like, they're praying, God, intervene, help our brothers in prison. And then she shows up. He's like, Peter's outside. No, he's not. Like, like there's kind of believe. And I'm like, man, I kind of pray that way too. What else? Some other thoughts. Oh, Mel. Good morning.
Good morning. I liked your shout out to the Shawshank Redemption, and I guess I'll go a little further to justify my reason for watching it or whatever. But it's a nice segue if you're talking to someone and you want to, talk about Christ and that kind of thing. How many Dufresne? How many things you can tick off on a checklist? That he was a shadow of Christ. And I'd always like to know if I ever saw Stephen King, how much he actually thought about that or if he did at all. But anyway, so Dufresne, he was a banker, lived in this middle-class world, kind of a glorified world, and then had to leave it and go down into this hell on earth, so to speak, right? And while he was there, he remained sinless, and he improved the community around him. Like his presence, like the music and bringing the school, the education to the kid there. And then, unfortunately, some people died around it. But he remained true to his goodness. And then the New Testament alludes to Christ while he was here after he died. He descended into hell, and that would Dufresne crawling through the sewer. And then when he gets out at the other end of the tube, he's kind of glorified. The lightning strikes, the rain purifies him, he's washed off. And at the very end, he ends up in paradise, symbolized by the beach, and his friends come join him, Where I'm going, there you can be with me sometime as well. So it's kind of a cool analogy to it that I've used on different occasions talking to others. I said, do you ever realize how much Dufresne, he's like Jesus Christ? And, no. Anyway, enough about that.
Yeah, that's great, Mel. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, all the best art, all the stories that resonate so deeply with us, many have that kind of similar story arc to them. Yeah. If you've never watched the movie and you're going to watch it and then you're appalled that I brought it up, just remember Mel Benson said that today, so. I haven't read the book, but okay, the book's good too. All right. Generally, if there's a book or a movie, I jump to the movie first. I'm just going to be honest. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit for just a couple minutes about this. Like every week when we come into this text as we're working through the story of the early church, there's always the challenge. So what does this mean for us here today? What can this mean? And there's lots of different ways we could take this. Some of you brought up different themes that I think are good for us to pay attention to. The one that's been kind of hanging around for me this week in preparation is this idea of having faith and trust in Jesus that transcends our circumstance. So, as we talk about what it means to be a disciple, to be an apprentice of Jesus, to follow in the way of Jesus, there's something about that as we move forward and we grow in maturity, as we put our connection with Jesus, like John 15 talks about, like being the vine and us connecting into our source of life. That transformation that comes for us as we get rooted and established in Jesus allows us then to have a different perspective on life. It doesn't eliminate the ups and downs or the struggles in any way, but it allows us to walk through them and to understand them in a way that is shaped by Jesus. That we are still in this place of now and not yet. That Jesus initiates and inaugurates his kingdom, but it's not yet fully realized. We have this opportunity of hope and forgiveness and redemption through Jesus, but the pain of everything that he's still undoing and making right and perfect is still a part of our reality. And so I believe one of the markers of maturity in Jesus is the ability to see circumstance in a different way that doesn't ebb and flow simply based on what's going on. So when things are going well, then we're doing great. But when things are, in God's grid, and when things are going in a difficult trajectory, we then question, is God good? And I understand I'm not saying those questions aren't valid. I'm not saying it's not important to have those conversations or to kick that stuff around. I'm saying the examples I have kind of from my own life is when stuff gets challenging and difficult, those who are deep wells and rooted in Jesus have this ability to kind of move through the moments with a different level of awareness and steadfastness, trusting in the goodness and the sovereignty of God. And we see this. I was just making a list of a number of things, and the first one I wanted to mention just real quick is so Jesus himself, as he's in the garden, and he knows the task he's about to be arrested. He knows what's coming. He prays this in Luke 22, "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Jesus is earnestly praying, is there another possible way for this to take place? But ultimately, your will is more important than anything, and he submits himself to the will and the way of the Father. And then over and over in the rise of the early church, in Acts chapter 7, we talked about the stoning of Stephen being the first martyr in the church. As he's having that last moment, he looks up to God and he asks God to receive his spirit. There's this resilience and faith that no matter what's happening around him, he still has this confidence in who God is. Not such a kind of a dark way, but even Philip, if you think about when he gets that instruction to head from Jerusalem down to Gaza and he meets the Ethiopian leader on the road, and that person is trying to understand what it means. He's reading through the prophet Isaiah, he's trying to understand, and Philip explains it all. Imagine even for Philip, there's this moment of like, why on earth would I go down there? Why on earth would I talk to this person? But his faith and confidence, what God's inviting him into, put him in the posture of saying, yes, I guess I will respond. And it makes him available to help someone else encounter Jesus and be baptized. So over and over, we see these examples of obedience and faithfulness. And remember for Peter, a verse earlier, his friend, Peter, James, and John. So James and John were the brothers, right, that I talked about, called by Jesus to leave their father's fishing, sons of Zebedee, sons of thunder they're called. And Peter, James, and John were kind of like the inner circle for Jesus and his friendships. So Peter's friend now is the one a verse earlier who's executed. Can you imagine him saying, well, why didn't he not get out of this? Wait a second, he just had that, now I've been released twice? And he continues on. And later on, Peter will lose his life to this mission. But there's this cycle of obedience and trust that transcends circumstances. So here's what we want to do. Here's how we want to respond together, even physically respond. So Jesus, as he's spending time with his friends on the last night, takes bread, breaks it, says, "This is my body." Then he takes the cup, and after he's given thanks, he passes it around to them. He says, this wine, this juice that you're about to drink is a symbol of this new covenant in my blood the forgiveness of sin for all people, because Jesus knows what is ahead of him just a few moments later. And he invites us as followers of Jesus to continue to practice, to eat the bread and to drink the cup as a way of remembrance and in a way of announcing his kingdom. That there's something that we are a part of that transcends our momentary experience. So as we come to the table, we come as an act of remembrance for Jesus' death and his willingness, the love that compels him to give his whole self for us. And as followers of Jesus, we do this on a regular basis to remind ourselves of what we belong to. And it all goes back to these roots. The church through the centuries has been doing this repeatedly, sometimes weekly in certain traditions, sometimes monthly in other traditions, but reminding ourselves of the death of Jesus, the cost and the price he paid for us, while also, as an act of celebration, recognizing that death did not have the final say, and his resurrection provides a way for us to have a new life. Through his death and resurrection, the kingdom is inaugurated. And so we come in remembrance, we come in worship, we come in celebration. And we also come in this way, friends. If you are struggling and wrestling in your faith right now, if it feels like life circumstances are completely overwhelming and you've been given the raw deal, and you're praying fervently and earnestly and asking God to intervene and you don't have an answer, I don't have that answer for you. But what I can say is that the God who transcends all of these things continues to love and to welcome you to the table and is present with you in your circumstance. Doesn't necessarily eliminate it for you in the moment, but is present with you in the pain and suffering and the questioning. So come to the table even if you're struggling and wrestling, even if you have questions, even if you're like, God, where are you in this moment? Come. And if you are in a place of goodness and celebration and joy, you come to remember and to celebrate and remind yourself as you come that it won't always be this way. It is not always this way. That's one of the beauties about community, is that we can be honest about our ups and honest about our downs, and all of it acknowledge that Jesus is Lord. Acknowledge that Jesus transcends all these things. So as we come up the center and take, the servers can come up and then head back to your seats. If you want to come, come. There's no pressure. If you want to come, please come. But let me just read this out. Come to the table, to the thief and to the doubter. Come to the table, the hero and the coward. Come to the table, the prisoner and the soldier, the young and the old. Come, all who hunger and all who thirst. Come the first, come the last. Come the pauper, come the princess. Come the prince. Come to the table, all who fail and all who've been forgiven. All who dream and all who suffer, all who are loved and all who have experienced loss. Come, all who are chained and all who are set free, all who follow, all who lead. Come, anyone who's been lost and anyone who's been found. All who've been labeled right or labeled wrong. Anyone who hears this song, come to the table. Would you stand and close in prayer with me? So Jesus, we come to this table acknowledging you as Lord and Savior and Redeemer and God and Victor. We come as an act of remembrance, joining with the church through the centuries to remember the price you paid, your great love that led you to this place, this position of giving your full self so that we could have forgiveness and hope. We also come, even despite our circumstances, as an example and as a posture of worship that, God, you are over all these things. And whether we're stuck in the mud right now or we're on a mountaintop, we come recognizing that life is all about different moments, and we need you equally in them. Thank you, God, that you are still putting all this back to right. You are still the God who is restoring and welcoming us to this table. We come as an act of worship. Jesus, we sing for your glory, for your honor. Amen.